intellect and personality. Scalia helped to move the court from a somewhat sloppy, results-oriented, center-left institution to a more intellectually rigorous, center-right court that forefronts text and history over other modes of interpretation. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm the first promising speaker, Jacob Santelli, debating the resolution Justice Antonin Scalia's Supreme Court career did more good than harm. So first, I'm going to define a few key terms. Then I'm going to lay out the proposition's framework for this debate, and say a few points of my own. So I'd like to define good as legal change or upholding, which would fill the judicial burden and increase both the liberties and security of the American man and woman. So the proposition's framework is that of a judicial burden. So we just have to prove that Justice Antonin Scalia fulfilled his judicial burden. Because in a 30-minute debate, 6 middle schoolers could not decide if the career of a man who spent his entire life judging the Constitution was valid or had merit. I'd like to define judicial burden as adhering to stare decisis and constitutional dictate, as well as setting a precedent for how all judges in America should comport themselves and make their decisions. So first, my first point is that he fathered the conservative originalist movement. As a democratic society which values discourse over indubitable correctness, to validate this point's impact, only Scalia's influence on this movement and its importance must be proven, not necessarily its merit, going back to what I said earlier. In his original decisions, Scalia widened the American public text gambit as he employed the messages of documents which were written for or by our founding fathers. He reinvigorated the consumption of such works. These documents, after Scalia revived them, have been referenced by liberals as well as conservatives on all sides of the debate. That's from Political Magazine. According to Professor of Law at George Mason University, today both textualism and originalism enjoy widespread acceptance. Some of that support even cuts across ideological lines. A new generation of left or center originalists has emerged in the academic world. In proclaiming the document a dead document, proclaiming the Constitution a dead document, defining that as each clause has a very specific interpretation, he restored its legitimacy and solidified its relevance. When anyone references the Constitution as evidence, it should be known that the document's validity is owed to Justice Antonin Scalia. Lawrence H. Carl F. Lowe. So he identified what he believed would become the judicial pseudoscience and combated it by reconstructing the Constitution's role. That's from Northwestern University. So this goes to say that he changed how the court functioned on a very basic level. His originalist doctrinaire approach, Scalia depoliticized the court. He took it from A, this sloppy thing, but B, this very political thing, something that was just conservative versus liberal. We can't have that. That's not the role of the Supreme Court. The role of the Supreme Court is to decide the legitimacy of arguments based solely on the Constitution. And he moved it from something that was liberal or conservative, and you could have these wishy-washy debates, which were just decided on that. He moved away from that. He solidified the court as a legitimate thing. And really, what else can we ask from a Supreme Court justice rather than fixing how the court works and solidifying the legitimacy of the Constitution, the very document which he was sworn to protect. And his originalism led him to impact theories that transcend judicial law. He affected every single part of the government and every single part of the judicial system. And coming back to our burdens, we've proven he's fulfilled his judicial burden because he changed how the entire system worked. He changed the ways it was interpreted, the schools of thought was interpreted, and that's all we can ask from a Supreme Court justice. Now I'd like to move on to my second point. He handed down principled decisions. In District of Columbia versus Heller, Scalia upheld the common American man or woman's Second Amendment right to bear arms individually in a well-crafted majority opinion. Scalia picked apart the wording of the amendment, and that was something that had never been done before. He looked at it word by word, comma for comma, and he looked at it more carefully than it had ever been looked at before. And I'd like to go back to this idea of what else can we ask from a Supreme Court justice? In Lawrence v. Texas, Scalia dissented the striking down of a Texas statute banning sodomy. His reason was that it was not in the court's power to nullify state law that wasn't unconstitutional. The opposition would like you to believe that he was this immoral man, or whatever they want you to believe, but he just believed that a 9-person court couldn't decide morality for an entire nation. So considering these things, I'd like to thank you, and please vote for the proposition.
Judge ready and speaker is ready? Yeah. Okay, great. So let me begin. Once Scalia became a Supreme Court justice, he brought us into a world where a presidential candidate, to be one, you have to raise hundreds of millions of dollars. In the Citizens United case, Scalia wasn't only the deciding vote, but was the main supporter of this bill that 78% of the Supreme Court, or 78% of the country was against in an NBC special poll. And he was a leader in the Supreme Court. This bill allowed companies to give hundreds of millions of dollars, however they wanted, to campaigns. So to be a presidential candidate, you now had to raise billions and have billions or cater to the companies. Hello, I am Alex Goldman and I am for the opposition of this debate. First, I will challenge the proposition's frame saying that it isn't fair and attack their arguments. Then I will attack their arguments and refute their points that they made. And then I will define some of my own arguments and build on them. Okay, so first, to challenge their frame, he did what a judge needs to do. Well, basically all a judge needs to do is vote, but they also have said a lot of arguments about how he was a great judge and above it all. Well, basically, he actually challenged his own originalism, textualism propositions when he introduced a new bill. Originalism and textualism, as they said, just means to follow and interpret the Constitution literally. In the Heller versus Washington, D.C. case, he added a new bill saying that people could bear arms as individuals, even though the amendment says as a well-armed militia we could bear arms. This made it virtually impossible to take guns away from any individual, and over 300 shootings have taken place in the U.S. since that happened in 2007. Judge, remember Sandy Hook? Under this law, the mentally disturbed individual who carried out the shooting couldn't have his gun taken away. Also, you said how he created originalism and textualism, which was so great, and how they were new, and how he organized the Supreme Court for this. Well, let me tell you, only 2 out of the 9 judges in a conservative majority Supreme Court when he was around actually followed these documents. And this is from debate.org. And also, this means that we're interpreting the Constitution literally, like we were in 1787. This means that African American people should be slaves, interracial marriage should be illegal, and that women shouldn't have the right to vote. Judge, we agree that the Constitution is good, but it needs to modernize with our country. After all, it's 2016, not 1787. He can't hold us hostage in 1787. Okay, now I would like to build some of my own points. Okay, first of all, he was not only representing an old dinosaur who took the Constitution literally, but he wasn't also nonpartisan. In the Bush versus Gore case, in the 2000 presidential election, the electoral votes were so close that the election came down to one state, Florida. Since the numbers were so close under Florida state law, the votes were recounted multiple times. And Gore was gaining every time, only 1,000 votes apart in a country of 320 million people. But the Supreme Court, he voted conservative and stopped the recount, even though Gore was getting closer and the numbers were still proven off, proving that he would side with conservatives when it came down to conservatism. Yes?
The political nature of that decision, he made it so that it could not be used as stare decisis and not set a precedent. Are you aware of this?
Okay, but he unfairly recounted, he stopped the recount that may have made the wrong man elected president. He could have swayed the vote.
That's an opinion.
Okay, now on to my own argument. He set harmful precedents on environmental issues. In many cases, he voted against protecting endangered natural resources. These precedents in the cases destroyed wildlife and set an example of not preserving the earth we live on. In Utility Air Regulatory Group versus the EPA, Scalia wrote the majority opinion to legalize is environmental taking over of property versus wetlands. Thank you, and please vote for the opposition.
All right, let's welcome the second speaker for the proposition.
Good evening, my name is Antonin, and in my speech I will first rebut the points that the opposition made. Second, I will reconstruct my colleagues' points in terms of how the opposition attempted to rebut them. And the last thing I will do, if time allows, is I will add 1 point on to the proposition's already compelling case. All right, so the first point, actually I'm going to address the example I gave about the Citizens United case. Well, again, it's arrogant to assert that us middle schoolers can decide a case that was actually decided 5-4 by a group of extremely learned individuals. And second, I'd like to point out that he defended free speech, which is extremely originalist, and he also led a productive discourse on the issue of whether or not we should consider money as free speech. In a democracy, we need to value the substance of speech, not necessarily whether or not it convinced other justices on the court. They gave their first point was that he was partisan, and their reasoning for this was that in the Bush v. Gore decision, he decided to not recount the manual votes given in the state of Florida. However, I'd like to point out that this decision was an anomaly. It had to do with common law and not constitutional law, so we can't evaluate his aptitude as an originalist based on this case. And like my colleague said, in his majority opinion, he wrote that that case should not be used in precedents or for stare decisis. So again, he didn't really think that this should have been left up to the Supreme Court, but had to decide it anyway because that was in his job. So as for my roadmap, I'd like to move on to reconstructing the proposition's first point, that he followed the judicial originalist movement. The opposition had two contentions for this. First, they said that his stance on the right to bear arms was extremely problematic. However, it wasn't. First of all, the right for militias to bear arms was a subordinate clause, meaning that individuals were given the right to bear arms as individuals in the state. And you can see that Justice Scalia was not okay with looking at words and twisting them to fit his pseudo-scientific, analytic view of the Constitution. He instead looked at these words without their subliminal meaning, as they should be looked at when you're considering statutory law. And he also understood that you need a military, then you also need state militias, and then you also need individuals to bear arms to protect themselves as citizens of the United States. They also gave the point that he didn't have the majority of the court in many of the decisions, that it was 2-9, and the reason it was 2-9 is because you had Antonin Scalia and Justice Clarence Thomas. And I will remind you that Justice Clarence Thomas and Antonin Scalia were the two proponents of originalism. So actually proving our point that in many cases they only had a 2-7 majority, or minority, my mistake, because that means that they were abiding by originalist principles when other members of the court weren't. They were abiding by pragmatist principles, which we're not saying are inherently flawed, but we're just saying that it was good that Scalia stood by his principles that he so ardently believed in. Our second point was that he handed down principled decisions. They basically said that these decisions weren't principled because the Constitution is a living document. It stands to change and it stands to interpretation. However, this judicial activist stance on the Constitution cannot really be condoned because it's not legitimate. The Constitution, if it can be twisted in 5 different ways to explain different political leanings, then it's not a real document. That's just a means of false validation. It's just a means of false validation for the justices in their decision. As for my roadmap, I'd like to move on to adding 1 point on to the proposition's already compelling case. So, yes.
Judge, I'd just like to point out that not wanting to live in 1787 doesn't make you a judicial activist.
I also like to remind the judge that was not a question, therefore I don't have to answer it and I can answer it. So our point is that he made the court more populist, right? And whatever political leaning you decide to go to, however you're politically politically inclined, you must understand that bringing the Supreme Court closer to the people of the United States is a net positive, it's a net good. And according to the journal Above the Law, Scalia did just that. Scalia battled for the rights of those who are underrepresented. For instance, we gave the case with Keller, how he battled for the Second Amendment because he believed that it was in the Constitution. Those rural upbringings are in the political minority. They are underrepresented, and he fought for those people's rights because he saw that it was in the First Amendment of the Constitution. I'd also like to add that Scalia reformed the purpose of the court itself, leaving more decisions to the state. And they brought up this other example of environmentalism and change that Scalia didn't have the correct stance on that issue. However, he did. He actually didn't take a stance at all. He dissented because he deferred that position to the states. The people should decide their own laws. And lastly, I'd like to leave you the fact that even if the American people didn't agree with all those decisions Scalia made, many Americans resonated with the message that the Constitution is meaningless if it is merely a context for partisan rulings.
Hackley School, and I'm defending the notion that Justice Antonin Scalia's Supreme Court career did more harm than good. Here's my roadmap for the judge. First, I will refute my opponent's points, then I will rebuild my team's points, and then I will give you the significance of this debate, Judge. First, on to my refutes. So you said that Scalia turned the court into a good intellectual one, but he used those skills to verbally attack groups of minorities. So how was that using his intellectual skills in a good way? You also said that he fathered the Constitution, but he actually contradicted that in many times, as I will get into later. He didn't restore it He took it into consideration the way that we did in 1787, and we don't live in 1787, so that's practically pointless to take it into consideration that way. It's not that, because we don't live in 1787. You did, and he didn't fix the court, so what you said was incorrect, and I can't take that into consideration, because saying that he fixed the court is just incorrect. And you also said that he picked apart the amendments about the way that they were in 1787. But again, we don't live in 1787, and he can't just take apart those amendments like the way they were back then. Okay, you said that he read the Constitution as how it was back then, but he took the Second Amendment and said that guns were not only for the police, but for anyone. He sided with the NRA. That makes it practically impossible to make gun law restrictions. You said that he battled for those who could not themselves, but why did he verbally attack minorities when they couldn't stand up for themselves? Why do you say that he defended them when they couldn't themselves and he was the one who's actually attacking them? Now I will rebuild some of my teammates' points. He set harmful precedents on the environment issues. In many cases, he voted against protecting endangered species, wetlands, and other natural resources. These precedents in cases destroyed wildlife and set an example of not preserving Earth we live on.
Would you rather have the Supreme Court decide issues of environmental protection or the people of the United States?
I believe that the people who should be deciding the environment are the people who live in it, so they can both decide. But the way he decided it, he just wants, in many cases, he's voting against these endangered species, against our environment and the Earth, and not preserving the Earth that we live on. Now, Scalia was instrumental in decisions that put our democracy in jeopardy. Citizens United, a decision that made 5-4, saying that corporations have the right to donate as much money as they want to political candidates as a private citizen, meaning that they can donate unlimited amounts. This led to the creation of the super PACs group of wealthy businesses who donate absorbent amounts of money to one political candidate without the information of donate money ever to be disclosed. This means that he made it legal for these corporations to donate as much money as they wanted to a candidate. And it's not fair because it makes them the campaign unbalanced when one candidate has millions of dollars and the others are barely passing by. Also, he caused many setbacks for women. In many cases, he voted in a manner that caused many challenges for women not being able to decide what they want to do with their bodies, especially for abortion. As well as hurting abortion rights, he through wage inequality. In Walmart versus Dukes, multiple women accused of Walmart of wage inequality in which 1.5 million women sued Walmart in the largest class action suit in American history in a 4-to-5 majority. Scalia delivered the harm opinion that their opinion must have been invalid because it was not possible that all managers discriminate, which was to reserve the lower class of appeals decision. Now I will give you the significance of this debate. What this debate boils down to is that Scalia was holding America hostage in 1787. He was instrumental in risking our democracy over Citizens United and verbally attacking dozens of groups of minorities based on his own biased opinion. Although Scalia defended the Constitution, he worked hard to vote against it in all matters. And at that point, there was almost no truth and equality to defend after his decisions. On our side, we have the mistreated citizens that Scalia's decisions to hurt and his lurking biased views that hurt many. And for these reasons, Judge, I urge you to vote for the opposition side of this debate.
And I'm speaking third for the opposition and on the notion that the Supreme Court career of Justice Antonin Scalia did more good than harm. Okay, first I'd just like to start by refuting my opponent's points, then I will crystallize my own team's point and weigh the debate and explain to you why, if not doing equal harm and good, then he certainly did more harm. Okay, first I'd like to start off by stating that their frame that's saying that we're not fit to analyze any of this is because we're all in middle schoolers. That's kind of pointless because we're all here to debate. So why are we here if he's claiming that because we're middle schoolers we shouldn't be able to analyze this? Okay. Next, they spoke a lot about originalism and how the Constitution should be treated as a dead document. But that's just not realistic. We're a developing country, so we should have a developing document. It's just not reflecting how our country is anymore. Okay. He also talked about how they solidified the court through originalism, but the fact is only 2 others on the court accepted it, so it really wasn't solidifying anything, so it didn't really have any impact. Also, he said they were he was sworn to protect the Constitution, but then why did he go against his own philosophy of textualism in the case in the case on the Second Amendment, he came up with the fact that militia is now private citizen, even though his philosophy of textualism directly contradicts that. So really, he just said it. He just claimed it when it fit his own stuff. But when he had a different view, he changed his own opinions. Okay. And they talk about Citizens United and how money was considered free speech. And yet in super PACs, who is donating the money is never disclosed, so how is it speech? Okay, now I'd like to start weighing the debate for you. Okay, so Judge, on their side, they have the points about originalism. But as we've already stated, he just used originalism and textualism to fit his own biased whip. And they also spoke about how he represented minority groups, even though, as my teammate has stated,
He was incredibly abusive and wrote pretty horrible things about many minority groups and women. Okay, now on our side, Judge, we have the fact that Scalia harmed and threatened minorities in many of his opinions. Not to mention the fact that he was adamantly against women being able to choose what they want to do with their own bodies and having equal wage, because in the Walmart case, it was women's salary 75 cents to a man's dollar, and yet he still said it wasn't biased. Do you consider that fair, that women were earning 3/4 of what a man earned in a job? And his decisions were extremely harmful to our environment. In many cases, he voted against protecting endangered species and natural resources. He was against protecting the world we live on. And in many of these cases, it was a 5-4 decision, so his vote could have been the sway vote. Okay. And also, he was instrumental in making decisions that put our democracy in jeopardy. The case of Citizens United made it so that private citizens did not have the voice they should in political campaigns. They should be able to donate money and have that make an impact. But now that we have super PACs, he corrupted our election. So Judge, that is why I urge you to vote for the opposition, because Scalia, because he went against his own theories, that is their only point. Okay, Judge, that is why I urge you to vote for the opposition. Thank you.
The last speech of the proposition and in this debate tournament. So the first thing I would like to bring up is the fact that the opposition has presented us with several great debate topics that we are not addressing today. I am not going to stand here and argue Citizens United and abortion and gun laws, because that is not what this debate is about. This debate is about Justice Scalia as a Supreme Court judge. Him as a judge, his individual decisions that he made all root back to originalism. If you actually look to the right to bear arms decision, he actually sided with the Constitution. He spent hours and hours picking apart the Constitution, comma by comma, making sure that his point of view matched. The only situation where you could argue that he was partisan was the 2001 decision, Gore and Bush, but he is human, right? He is not a dinosaur, as the opposition so outrageously claimed. He is a human, and he will make bad decisions once in a while. But the point that he served on the Supreme Court for so many decades and made strong decisions one after another based in the Constitution makes him what we know today, setting a judicial precedent around the nation. Okay, my first point of crystallization is the concept of America. America is undoubtedly the best country in the world. It's true. Now, whether America and the people in this room debate partisanly, liberal or Democrat, liberal or Republican, doesn't have to do with this debate. It doesn't matter what you personally think of Citizens United, or what you personally think of abortion, or same-sex marriage. It just doesn't matter to this debate. What matters to this debate is that the judges see that his decisions regarding the Constitution and his originalist values drew back and created a wider precedent for judges all around America, creating a better democracy in the end. Okay, and the opposition loves this argument of 1787 and how it's a different place. Yeah, it was a different place, but you know what? The same democracy in the marketplace of ideas was the same in 1787 as it is today. And because of that, because democracy is the same today, and because the marketplace of ideas is the same today, him adding to the marketplace of ideas and adding his originalist values is what has driven the country to be how the great country is today. We all agree it is. He was one of the greatest reasons that happened. He is the reason that our country is so good today, because he has added his idea to the marketplace of ideas, writing a record amount of dissents in the Supreme Court, being a voice of the originalism, father of originalism all around the country. He has created a better America inherently because of the marketplace of ideas. Not agreeing to that shows a certain shows a certain level of ignorancy in that you don't know what the marketplace of ideas is. The marketplace of ideas is when you add ideas to this great basin of ideas in America or the world, and inherently, if there are more ideas there, the better the outcome is going to be. So his ideas, even if you do not agree with them, set the precedent of good ideas in general, because he's adding towards the ideas of either liberalism or conservatism. He's adding to that big kind of specter and creating a better America. So now I will move into Wade. Their side of the case has refused to mention states' rights and how Justice Scalia was actually a great believer in states' rights. His arguments with same-sex marriage, he believed that states had the right to choose for themselves.
New
and
point.
No, that was part of my second and first speaker. Please flow correctly. So the whole concept that he voted against certain decisions, he was actually handing power to the states, and because he believed a council of unelected officials do not have the right to power a democratic country, or we wanted a democratically elected, powerful people, and he realized that. So he believed that him, as one of 9 people on this council, did not have the right to make decisions that rule over 300 million people, because that is not how our country works inherently. Okay, I would like to end this debate by reminding the judges that his decisions have nothing to do with this. His overall precedent in the judicial world is, please vote side, proposition.
Told you, right? So applause for both teams. There'll be a brief recess while the judges make their decisions, so talk amongst yourselves. All right, it was an excellent debate. Let's have a round of congratulations to everyone. Told you, right? That's way more sophisticated stuff than when you turn on the average news station. I am really very impressed with both teams. I really congratulate you on it. It was a unanimous decision by all 3 of our veteran judges, and so it's my pleasure to recognize the Northeast Regional Tournament Champion, the Middle School Public Debate Program, and that is the opposition team from Hackley. Enthusiastic applause for our second place team from Columbia. All right, I want to thank everybody for having a great day.